Is the Canadian real estate crash going to enter the fear stage in 2025? That's what we're going to be discussing in this video. But we do know one thing, and that is more and more people are now defaulting on their mortgages, which is never a good sign. And we're going to compare this to 2008 in the United States, which obviously went through a real estate bubble and the demise of a real estate bubble. So Toronto mortgage delinquency rates hit a 9-year high. So all these will be linked in the description if you want to read the whole thing. So Toronto real estate just got another sign that it entered one of its roughest markets ever. Equifax data shows that the Greater Toronto mortgage delinquency rate climbed again in Q2 2024. And just think for a second how laggy that data really is. We're talking about Q2 2024 when we're in Q1 2025. I mean, come on. So this is really, really old. So basically just 2 years after hitting a record low, the rate is now climbing at one of the most aggressive paces in history, hitting a 9-year high in the latest data. And we're going to show the correlation between different data sets so you can understand, well, if this is rising, what effect is this going to have on mortgage delinquencies and the overall real estate market? Obviously, we're focusing in on Toronto here, but Toronto and Vancouver are the biggest bubbles in Canada. That does not mean any other bubble is safe in Canada. These are just the biggest, so obviously their demise is going to come first, and it's the most money, has the biggest effect on the banking system. The mortgage delinquency rate is the share of total mortgages at least 90 days past due. It is one of the most discussed and important economic indicators, but also one of the most misunderstood, and I agree with that. And you know, one thing I want to talk about is how we've had the rise of private mortgage lenders that has really happened. And obviously, when you have private mortgage lenders that are going on and you have these different things that are happening, obviously that shows where you are in the actual cycle here. So if we go to the bubble cycle here, you can see you've got enthusiasm, greed, delusion, and it would be this delusion, which is just behind where my little icon is there, that you would have the most people going into private mortgages and everything like that. So most people think a rising delinquency rate means households are struggling. Not necessarily the case, since most people will try to sell their property before the mortgage becomes delinquent. In a hot market, a distressed seller can sell the property and often make money before the mortgage turns delinquent. Mortgage borrowers only tend to default when they can't dispose of the property in a timely fashion. In short, it's less of a sign of consumer health and more of a sign of market liquidity. And that is true. And we've been seeing sales that are just dropping and dropping and dropping in these massive bubbles. And I want to take you all the way back to 2021 and 2022 when there was just unbelievable euphoria. And we were talking about how this is all going to come to a train wreck of an ending when it all comes to head. Because the reality is, when you've got people behaving like a bunch of sheep, when they think that things are just going to rise indefinitely and you can just buy a house and make money just by flipping houses constantly, not doing anything to them, just holding them, then yeah, it's likely to become a speculative mania. Especially with property, it's no wonder that we see property bubbles time and time again, because obviously there's something tangible there. It's property, and most people think that is rock solid, despite the cases in history, even in Canada, where it's been shown that that is not the case. And people tend to only look the past 10, 20 years and not any more than that. And of course, if you look the past 30, 40 years, that's when you begin to see those other bubbles that happen in Canada. So obviously we know interest rates are coming down right now, and that has an effect on the real estate market. And as these interest rates come down further and further, yes, you are going to see people who are on the sidelines who now think it's all clear and it's all safe to enter the market. But once again, they've kind of been brainwashed here by the mainstream media to believe that interest rates and real estate are just totally correlated now. So when rates go up, real estate prices come down, and then when rates go down, real estate prices, they go up again. And that's just an oversimplified way way of talking about the real estate market, way too oversimplified. And really, it actually relates more to the economy and more to unemployment. And if you look at the delinquency rate here, I want to take you back to this area here where you've got between 2014 and 2017. Obviously, we know Canada narrowly and the global economy narrowly avoided a recession during that time. And if you just forget about the spike in unemployment here, which happened during the pandemic, if you go back to those times, well, would you look at that? Unemployment was actually very, very similar to the rates that we're seeing right now. So the unemployment rate is very, very similar to back then. So obviously you can see here the correlation on this chart. You had rates of delinquency very similar. And I want to emphasize here, it's saying like a rate of 0.2%, but we've been through this many times, and maybe I'll link that video in the pinned comment and you can check that out if you want. But these delinquency rates, they're not accurate at all either. And because of that, you get a lot of people saying, oh, the delinquency rate's not that high, but it's not including all the private lenders and things like that. And if you follow Shazzy on Twitter, you'll see, and we've been through on this channel many times as well, the examples, a lot of those are turning to power of sales. You're seeing more and more power of sales that are happening, and most of them are private lenders. Why? Because they're the weakest borrowers, and it's just going to filter through. It's filtering through the economy in the degree of risk that you have. The very, very extreme risk, they're getting hit right now. Then it will be extreme risk, and then it will be moderate risk, and then even low risk will get hit eventually. Because if you look at the unemployment rate right now and what we've had happen over 2024, I mean, the unemployment rate has gone from 5.7% all the way up to 6.8%. That's a big jump in the unemployment rate. And what do you think is going to happen? Do you think this is going to continue? You see, the problem is the mainstream economists think that by bringing down interest rates, everything just heats up automatically. Like the entire economy is just dependent on interest rates. And it's far more complex than that. It's a varying amount of different factors, including sentiment, unemployment, what the growth is, obviously your population growth as well, whether wages are going up. There's so many different factors that you can't oversimplify it and say that. But they are thinking by bringing these interest rates down that guess what? Unemployment's just going to start going down. And we know that's not the case. And if you go back to 2008 in the US, this chart is delinquency rate for single family homes, residential mortgages. And if you look around 2005, 2006, it's around 1.6%. In fact, if you're looking around 2005, 2006, when this thing peaked out, you can see that delinquencies back then were actually at their lowest ever. So you can imagine the sort of narrative that people were talking about around that real estate market. And then guess what? You had the real estate prices that came down as unemployment went up. And it was only around 2008 that you got up to the unemployment rate that Canada is at right now. And we know for a fact that during that time, that was really when they started to enter that fear, capitulation, despair part of the cycle, which you can see on my screen right now. I know I'll just move this over for a second, but you can see how you've got return to normal and then you've got fear, capitulation. And if you go through this and think about what's happened over the past 4 years, we have definitely seen this play out. I mean, especially with the denial. I mean, do you remember when real estate prices started going down, how people were saying, oh, it's just going to be temporary. And then it was the next spring market. Oh, everything's going to be back to normal. And then the next spring market. Oh, everything's going to come back. And it just didn't come back. And I'm sure this year is going to be the same thing. And even you might see that prices start to tick up again. But that is just going to be a temporary thing unless the economy actually starts to improve, because these things revert back to fundamentals. And I'm yet to find an example of a real estate bubble where you have this cycle play out and it gets to return to normal fear stage and then it just goes off to the races again. I mean, you just don't see it. And it's the greed delusion that I want to highlight in this video, because when you have that happen, that is the reason why you have more and more more people that are resorting to private lenders, like this article is talking about here. That is why that happens. It's because people essentially go insane over the real estate. But the reality is, this doesn't even include half the data, and this data is really old as well. We're talking about data that's over 6 months old right now. So where do you think this is going to have gone? Do you think it's going to be at the highs for the past 15, 20 years, or do you think it's just going to come back down? I mean, nothing goes up in a straight line, obviously, but I definitely think the high probability is that this is just going to continue going up, and I think you're going to see something very similar to this. I don't think you'll ever see the default rates published as high as in the United States, because the reporting of default rates, as I've been through before, it's not very accurate and it's very voluntary, and there's not that many data sets on it to even begin with, so there's not many data comparisons that you can really make. Unfortunately, there's just a complete lack of data on it, which is probably not just a coincidence. So anyway, it'll be really interesting to see what happens. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd highly recommend that you check out this video here. If you want to help support the channel and get the best VPN that's out there, go to expressvpn.com/market mania. You can also support the channel, get access to early new content by going to buymeacoffee.com/market mania. I'll see you